Assalamualaikum and good afternoon everyone. Welcome to this open science webinar series, data sharing and how it can benefit your scientific career, brought to you by USM Library. We would like to welcome our special guest for today's webinar, Associate Professor Dr. SJOERD from VRIJE Universiteit Amsterdam. Good morning, Doctor. How are you?
Good morning, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Hopefully everything is going well and smoothly on your side. We can't wait to listen to your presentation today. Okay, we would also like to thank all the viewers who watch our videos live on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. Please introduce yourself through the chat box and enjoy this session. Before we start, I want to make a few announcements. All the participants will be given an e-certificate and CPD points for USM staff. You just need to fill in our feedback form. The link will be given at the end of the session. Meanwhile, you can ask any question related to the topic today by typing question, question, followed by your question in the chat box. Those questions will be answered by our speaker during the Q&A session. For your information, a recorded version of this webinar will be available and you can just go to our YouTube channel and Facebook page to view it later. Okay, now let me introduce our speaker for today, Associate Professor Dr. SJOERD Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Sciences Neuromechanics, VU Amsterdam. Dr. SJOERD was a PhD graduate in 2010 from VU University Amsterdam. After that, he gained experience as a postdoc in 2010 until 2013 at the Faculty of Movement and Rehabilitation Sciences, Q11, Belgium. Since 2007, Dr. SJOERD has been through a lot of experience in conducting various forms of research related to how humans are able to walk on two legs perfectly, the way the human body is built, and how remarkable control works from the central nervous system. He has published more than 112 article journals listed in Scopus, which achieved more than 3,000 citations. He is actively promoting open science, especially in research data sharing. He also actively used multiple open research data platforms such as Zenodo, Geodataset Repository, and ORCID to make the research college and the public able to access all his research outputs. Nevertheless, open science practices are his current norms of interest. His research outputs became the main reference and great discussion among various stakeholders in the Netherlands. With his and the university team's efforts in promoting open science, they have also brought an impact on increasing the ranking of his university in Times Higher Education. It has currently increased on 121 world ranking standing, on which high score on citations and international outlook. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to call upon our speaker, Dr. SJOERD, to proceed with the presentation. Please welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and to share some of my experience on sharing data and code, because I think sharing is what the research is all about. If you don't share your research, nobody will know about it, and it's kind of like this tree falling in the forest without anybody being present. Does it still make a noise? Does it? So yeah, I must acknowledge my funding supporters, which for several years has been NWO, which has granted me a VENI grant and a VRIJE grant, which has allowed me to do most of this work. And I should mention that I work at Amsterdam Movement Sciences, which is an institute formed by the VRIJE Universiteit VU and the VRIJE Universiteit Medical Center and the Amsterdam Medical Center. If you follow me on Twitter, you can see some of my ramblings and musings on these kind of things and more content-wise. And yeah, let's dive into it. I would like to thank also the organizers for allowing me to share my thoughts, because it's always, you may be willing to share your thoughts, but well, people should also be willing be there to listen, right? There needs to be a journal that wants to accept your work. There needs to be editors, and there needs to be people that invite you to give these kind of talks. So a short disclaimer also. I've just figured out that my presentation does not show the videos, and I can also not share my screen with some of the repositories, etc., that I wanted to show you. So I don't have these in my presentation, because usually I have these, like I click on the link while doing that, but that's not possible now. So the links will be on the screen, so you can type them in and have a look for yourself then. But for now, let's dive into it. And this is already a first link, I guess, which you can look at, but don't look at it for too long. This is the game W.b.t. It's a game in which you use 4 keys, Q, W, O, and P, to control a man running. Some of you may know this game, and some of you may have spent countless hours playing this game. Especially if right now you're 30 years old or something, you probably played this game quite a bit when you were studying. At least I know my friends did. And so the thing is, you have 4 controls only to control this runner. And you would say, well, that's easy, right? But it's incredibly hard. And the reason it's incredibly hard is because if you do something wrong, you'll fall. And the goal here is to run as far as possible for as quick as possible. And this is an incredibly hard game, and you have only 4 controls. Now imagine that the human body has more than 200 muscles, and all of these need to work in concert for us to walk like in a smooth way. You can imagine how complex it is. And you can also immediately, when you play this game, and I urge you to maybe have a play after the presentation, or you could play now, but then you miss out on the rest of the presentation. So this is always, I feel this is always a risk when I do this kind of presentations to introduce this game. But yeah, even with 4 controls, it's so incredibly hard. And now imagine the 200 controls that humans have. And so this sparks my interest. How do humans walk on 2 legs without falling over? And of course, children fall a lot, right? And that's not really a problem. And then like my age, we don't fall anymore that often. Like every once in a while we'll trip. But when we get older, we fall a lot again, and then it becomes a problem because we might break our hips. And so my idea is, if we better understand how we walk during normal walking, well, maybe then we won't have as much problems with people breaking their hips, etc. So this is what my research is about. And it's really cool research, I think, personally, because we measure 3D movements of people. So we use these kind of suits that you see that are being used for movies like Avatar. And also we build setups that can give a push or a pull to a participant. And this would have been a movie of my professor, actually. This was one of the first years of my PhD. And I had my professor on this treadmill. And we have a perturbation device here, which gives a very hard pull towards the side here via this rope, so that my professor almost falls. Now, and then I ask you, who gets to do this in the first year of their PhD, pull over their professor? I think only if you do this kind of research, you get these cool experiences. Good. So this is what my research is on, and this is to give you a bit of context. So what we usually measure are the kinematics, so the motions in 3D of the person that's walking. We measure muscle activity, and we sometimes measure brain activity as well. And these data can get quite big. So the kinematics, we measure 39 markers in 3 coordinates, X, Y, and so upwards, sidewards, and forwards. And we measure those at 50 samples per second. So you can imagine that's quite a bit of numbers. EMG is sampled at 2000 hertz, often up to 16 muscles. And EEG, we do 64 channels, also at 2000 hertz. So a data set for one subject can easily become 1 gigabyte. So in terms of sharing data, I often hear this like, well, you can only do this if you have smaller data sets. I don't think that's true. We do it as well with quite large data sets. I mean, of course, there is research where you acquire even larger data sets, but I think 1 gigabyte per subject and for 20 subjects, that's not very small. So that's some context. Then I need to thank many people for this journey that I did on open science and open data. And so these are some of the people that are on Twitter. Mathieu Bosconte, I know from Leuven. He's well, one of the people that inspired me to start doing this. And Nick Kluft was actually a PhD student, was the first one who said, I want all my my protocols, etc., to be open. These are some other people, and I'm grateful to all of them, and it's very important. Yeah, it's very important to me to mention these people because I think it's something you do with many people and it's not something you do alone. So it's quite funny to me that I'm giving this talk now because several years ago I was very skeptical on Twitter, having these conversations with people, and I was very skeptical on like, well, does it actually work? And you know, would you share your protocol? Why would you share your protocol if you're just honest in writing your manuscript? That should be enough, no? And I was like, well, so I didn't really see the benefit of all of it. And now I get these invitations, like the invitation for this talk, and this is another invitation as well, to give talks on this subject. So I've made a kind of a 180-degree turn in a way. And I'll show you along the way why this has been so. So it's mostly because people convinced me to do this, and then I did it, and my experiences were very positive. So short disclaimer before we really dive into like what I'm going to tell. I'm by no means an expert, and not every piece of science I do is fully open yet, because sometimes it's too complex. It's too complex to share data with MRIs because you cannot comply with privacy issues, etc. My slides usually look better, especially now that my links are not working and I don't have videos, and I find it very hard to make these kind of slides with more figures than text. Usually my slides are only figures and not text. And I learned most of this stuff in a way that some of you may not have expected, although I kind of alluded to it with my acknowledgements. I learned most of this from Twitter and following people who were very good at doing open science there. So, and I know how some of you feel. So if you've been looking a bit already at sharing data and sharing code, you probably may have come across Open Science Foundation. If not, I encourage you to have a look there. It's a great website for everything: pre-registration, registered reports, sharing data, sharing code, etc. You may have also seen Zenodo, which is great for sharing your code, and it's great for sharing your data. You may have seen bioRxiv, which is a preprint server so that your papers are more visible to everyone. You may have seen Figshare, where you can share your figures and your data. You may have seen GitHub, where you can share your code. You may have seen Dryad. You may have seen DANS, which is a Dutch data archiving and network services. And there's the read3data.org. So this is a registry of research data repositories. So it's actually much wider. And so you can quickly see that this becomes a mess. And so there's also As Predicted, where you can do like your pre-registrations. And yeah, this is kind of how I feel sometimes. I guess you all know this meme. And yeah, this is sometimes how I feel. Like there's too many tools out there, and there's not so often people come up with new tools, and I'm like, well, the problem is not that we don't have enough tools. The problem is that we have too much tools. And so this is yeah, I don't know. This is where my problem is at the moment, and I hope to hear from you as well, and maybe like we can have a nice discussion on that. My presentation will not be 30 minutes. Will not be an hour, more like 30 minutes. So I think we have ample time for discussion. And I hope that I can resolve some of the issues surrounding this. So I'm still not an expert. I'm talking here to you all about this. And I'm not an expert. I don't know everything. I know actually very little. And I think this is actually true. Perfect is the enemy of good. So it's better to just share your data and share your code in like some way than not share it at all. Because if you don't share it at all, well, then it's not out there, right? Then it's the tree that's falling in the forest with nobody present. And if you share it in an imperfect way, at least somebody's going to hear it and somebody might use it. So to me, this is really one of the things I learned along the way, that it's better to share your data like in a way that may not be perfect, where people say, well, maybe you could have done it better this way or done it better that way. But it's much better doing that way than aiming for perfect, because I think a lot of these tools are still being developed. And so perfect is still something that we cannot achieve yet. So I will not be talking about legal issues today. I should also mention that. Because especially in the Netherlands and in Europe, we have quite strict privacy laws. So we have GDPR, and it kind of conflicts at most times with sharing especially your data. Code is usually okay, but data freely. And so this is really an issue. I am not an expert on that. I'm even less an expert on that than actually sharing your data, but it is something you should be thinking about when sharing data. So finally, some things I will be talking about after all this more general introduction about who I am, what kind of research I do, how I got into like this whole open science thing, etc. I'd like to talk a bit about why do you do science, and why I think you will benefit from making your science as open as possible, no matter what your drive to do science is. I'll talk a bit about negative results and why it is important to publish them and how to make sure they get published. And I know this is not per se sharing of data, but I think it's just as important as sharing of your data and your code. I'll talk a bit about data and code sharing, why, when, where, and more. And I especially hope that you have many questions about that. And so I'll talk about whatever you bring up. I hope that we can have a good Q&A session there. So why do you do science? Can we see some comments in the chat on that? I'm also following the YouTube chat, so you can type it in there and I'll follow along. Oh, I see the YouTube is still lagging. So I'm just gonna assume that some of you come up with to solve problems. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think if I would have waited long enough for the YouTube chat to catch up, I would have seen answers like money. Some may argue, I mean, you could better do another job then, but at least in most places. Fame, we might want to win a Nobel Prize, I don't know, could be. Understanding the world, so we want to understand how the world around us works, and well, that's why we do science. Helping patients or solving problems, yeah, for sure. And other things. Yeah. And I would argue that if you do science for any of the reasons other than the first one, being as open as possible is a good thing. And if you do science for the money, well, I don't know. It doesn't, maybe it doesn't really help you. Maybe it does. I don't know. I never thought about that much. So as an example, I always take Deep Lab Cut, which is a movement tracking toolbox, which can do movement tracking of animals and humans. And this is a big thing in my field, because of course we're interested in how humans move. And they can do it without putting markers on people or animals. And so this toolbox is developed by the Mattis Lab, and they made this completely open source. And this means that other people could also do the same stuff. And then you could argue, well, that's bad for them, because if they could have private, they were the only one that could do it. And actually, this was not bad for them. This was a good thing for the Mattis Lab. Because this year at the SFN meeting, I looked at the abstracts. SFN is Society for Neuroscience meetings. And there were several abstracts that in the title already mentioned the use of Deep Lab Cut. And this is obviously good for a lab, because, well, it raises the exposure of the lab, and as such, the lab is probably likely to get more funding, right? The lab gets more famous, and everybody sees how important what they do is, etc. It's also good for science, because, well, they could have kept this to themselves and kept the whole world doing complicated stuff. But yeah, well, that wouldn't further science any much, right? So basically, it's a win-win-win situation. It's good in all cases to share this. And the only reason it's not good is if you're after this fame and this big prize, because you could argue, well, they could have kept it to themselves and kept it quiet, and then they could do all kinds of stuff that nobody else can. And I would argue that actually they gained more, because they became very famous for developing this tool and opening up to the world. And I think that's much more valuable to like society at large. So this is kind of my attitude towards these things. It's often much more valuable to open up than to keep to yourself. And it's also important for another thing. So there is a study which studied the likelihood of finding null effects in trials funded by the National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute. And so this is the study, and they found that over time, the chance of finding a null effect of a certain intervention increased. Yeah, so these black dots are benefit trials which found a benefit of a certain intervention. The blue dots found a null effect, and the red dots find a harm effect. And what you see is that there seems to be quite some positive effects before the year 2000, and after the year 2000, there's only 2 trials which found a positive effect and many which found a null effect. So what happened in the year 2000 is that the registration of primary outcomes was required on clinical trials at Gov. So from that moment onward, people could not simply say anymore, well, you know what, I use a different primary outcome. So then they had to say in advance, this is my primary outcome, this is what I will do, and go with that. And so from then onwards, most studies found no effects, because people couldn't switch their outcome anymore, most likely. Or it could, of course, also be that from 2000 onwards, no new interventions were found that had any effect. But that seems a bit unlikely to me. Now, obviously, this doesn't help patients, right? And it also doesn't help us. I don't know if any of you have tried to do a study and you based your idea of that study on another study, and and then after doing many studies, you found that, wait, actually that first study that I based my idea on probably was wrong. Well, that could happen due to these kind of things. It also doesn't help the taxpayer, because let's face it, I'm paid by NWO, or was paid by NWO, and now I'm paid by the university again, but it's still taxpayer money, right? And so they want to get kind of what's worth for their money, right? And if we just publish rubbish, well, it's not really worth their money. Huh? And still journals seem to prefer these positive findings. Positive in the sense that you need to find an effect, and otherwise they will not publish it. So how to solve this? I think a willingness to see negative results as equally important as positive results is very important. Yeah. Pre-registration, which I will talk about a bit. Registered reports, which I will also talk about a bit. And I think other statistics, for instance, ways of proving that your zero hypothesis is equally likely, such as equivalence testing or Bayesian stats, are also very important. And on top of that, of course, and I didn't put that on the list here, sharing of your data and code so that others can verify your results, or maybe can use your data to do new studies, is of great importance as well. So pre-registration, I think I should mention this, even though I was supposed to be talking about sharing data and code, but for me, these things go hand in hand. So with a pre-registration, you simply specify upfront what you will do and how, and you store that document in a locked and timestamped format. So you can always do that, no matter which journal you're going to. And so then you can make a clear distinction between confirmatory research, which is basically which you can pre-register, and you can say, well, we will do this. This is our primary outcome. We expect to find this. Yeah, and then you do it and you find it, or you don't find it. And exploratory research, which is not hypothesis testing. So in a strict sense, you should also be very cautious with using any statistical tests there, because you're not testing a hypothesis. So how can you use statistical tests? Yeah. And so this is hypothesis generating, and the results that you find there, they should be replicated and confirmed, because, well, you find it once and you find it, well, you really didn't really have that question. You were more exploring the data. And so this pre-registration is saying in a document, we're going to do this, we're going to do these analysis, we expect to find these outcomes. Yeah. So you can do that anytime before you start your next data collection. And you can do that after you are asked to collect more data and peer review. And you can also do it if you already have the data, but you begin analysis. Yeah. So why would you do it? Well, it makes your science better by increasing the credibility of your results. And it allows you to stake your claims earlier. And it's an easier way to plan for better research. Okay, so there is a question on hard to find data and where to find it. So Google has a data set search engine. Google data set search, it's called, I think. Yeah, so if you Google for Google dataset search, you'll find a lot of data sets across various sources. So this searches across Zenodo and whatever, basically all of these platforms. So it's a really good platform to search for data sets. And whether it's reliable, well, that's of course always up to you, right? Okay. So on the bottom here, heading back to pre-registration, on the bottom here, I have put the link where you can find more information on pre-registration. So what I always did for my papers, I usually had like for each project, I have a folder, and in that folder, I have a document which is already written. I used to do that before I did pre-registration, and it was basically already my introduction to my paper and my methods. And also like the results sections look like this. So this, what you see is a screenshot of a paper for which no data has been collected yet, even though it's 9 years later, which is kind of sad. So I wrote the paper, but I don't have the data yet. Of course, the results and the discussion are not written yet. But yeah, so for me, if I would move to pre-registration, this is actually not a lot of work, because all I need to do is do the pre-registration on, for instance, as predicted. And I have to fill out this form. And this form, as you can see, it has some very basic questions. So what's the main question? The key dependent variables, which conditions, what analysis, secondary analysis, etc. So this is quite easy to do, especially if you already kept a document like that. Yeah. So a registered report takes this idea somewhat further. You again specify upfront what we would do, but this time the plans will be peer reviewed, and if accepted, this will guarantee that the paper will also be accepted, unless of course you wrote very weird things in the paper. And so that is really nice, because it means that it really doesn't matter if you have negative results or not. Yeah. And so this is the link below here, osf.io/rr. Not all journals have this format yet, but this is kind of what the workflow looks like. So you develop an idea, then you design the study, then you have the stage 1 peer review. So the reviewers say, well, you should do this or you should do that, collect data in this way or whatever. Then you agree with the reviewers agree with you, they give you an accept, and you collect and analyze the data, you write the report. Then there's a stage 2 peer review, but at that point, basically the paper is already accepted, and it's more for, it can only be rejected if in the conclusions or discussion you write things that are in complete opposite to your findings, or you do stuff which is completely different from what you were supposed to do according to the study design. Yeah. So this is another way that ensures that negative publications actually get published. So these things can help problems with reporting negative results, and as such may stop people from p-hacking, where you change your dependent variable all along, like you change it every time, such that in the end you find a significant p-value. And they also provide clear boundaries between confirmatory research, where your stats will hold up, and exploratory research, where statistics actually don't count anymore. So we have done several pre-registrations, and we found actually that it was really hard, because even though we had pre-registered and we were doing the analysis, we found that at some point we were doing novel analysis, which actually we did not pre-register. Yeah. And imagine, so we were aware of that because we were reading the paper and we were going through it, one side the paper, one side the pre-registration. We noticed, wait, we did all this analysis, but they were not in the pre-registration, so we had to take them out. Or we had to say these were additional analysis. So if you already have that, if you made such a clear pre-registration, imagine how strong that effect is going to be at the moment that you don't have this pre-registration, right? So this is why I think it's very important. And so, like I said, you can always deviate from your pre-registration. And we have in our paper just the deviations from the pre-registration document. Yeah. So that's when you do things different than you said. Pre-registration may also help you enormously, as we had with one reviewer. And the reviewer says we had a paper and we had several hypotheses and we had all pre-registered. And the reviewer says, well, there is an overemphasis on hypothesis testing throughout the manuscript that is unwarranted and diminishes the credibility. This work is primarily exploratory in nature. no, well, and then some more. So he's basically saying, well, you're just doing an exploratory study. Why do you say it's hypothesis testing? And then we could say, well, you know what? One suggested method for deterring harking is pre-registration of the research proposal. We did at that time not officially pre-register this proposal, but we did put the project proposal on an OSF page. So this is why I'm also putting this under open data and open code. This is why I'm also telling you, because we make these proposals public before we actually do the research. Yeah. So people can see that and they can look at that, and it's basically our research ideas are already open a lot of the time. Yeah. So basically we could argue to the reviewer, well, look, it is hypothesis testing research, because here you can see the hypothesis, and this is like way before the data were collected. The data were also open. So it was easy for us to deal with the research, with the reviewer. So to me, this is also data and code, but most people think about data and code as like the actual data and the actual code. So why would you do that then? Well, it allows people to check your process. So our data the raw data is quite big, as I told you, and then we usually have to do a lot of computations with that, and that's a lot of programming, and programming is prone to errors. So if you kind of share your data and your code, people can redo your analysis, and they can check whether what you did was actually correct. It also allows people to do their own studies based on your data. So that's good use of resources. I mean, it means that they don't have to do a study again if there's already data available out there. And for sharing code, of course, it allows others to use methods that may otherwise not be available to them because they don't have the technical skill, right? So I developed quite some code, some of which I know that other people would have a hard time coding up. And for me, it's not that complex. And the other people probably could do it as well, but it would take them a long time. Now, if I share that code, I just make sure that other people don't have to spend a lot of time on creating that code. So I just make everyone's life easier. And so I'll see also the earlier example of Deep Lab Cut. I could probably code something like that on myself, but I'm very happy that others did it and that I can use their tools. So it's much easier. So my inspiration for this is in this paper. And so this is a paper by Jason Moore. And basically I found this paper in one day and I thought, this is amazing. If you go to this link, you'll see that basically what he has is you can compile this paper from the raw data. So he has scripts to go through the raw data, to download the raw data, process it, make the figures, and then compile the manuscript. And I thought, well, this is the way it should be actually, right? Because if I have this, I can check for every step along the way that it's correct. I can check that it's the correct figures, etc. So then I was really like, I want to do more data sharing and more code sharing. And this, I know for this data set of this paper that is on the screen right now, it has been used quite a bit by people for other studies as well. And yeah, otherwise they would have need to go into the lab, do their own data collection, do their own pre-processing of the data. That would cost somebody like 2 weeks or so of work. And now it's freely available. So we also share data and code, and it's great, but it's also a bit it's a bit scary because sometimes you make mistake in your coding, especially. Yeah. And we had this, and we had a reviewer notice this. Now, was I happy? No, I was very unhappy, but I was actually kind of happy because if this reviewer wouldn't have caught this mistake, so the reviewer basically says the authors made all data and scripts available, which is great. Looking over what's in this cloud drive, however, I noticed some weird issues. One issue is that some of the variables have very large jumps. And so this was clearly a mistake from our side. And you feel very shitty when your reviewer discovers this mistake. But I would have felt much worse if 5 months after the paper was accepted, somebody would have noticed this. Yeah, because now the reviewer noticed this, which meant that we could actually do something about it. Yeah, so this is also what we wrote to the reviewer. This is one of the reasons why we also share data and code, to make sure that due to unforeseen circumstances, we don't end up publishing rubbish. Yeah, because really, like, this felt really bad for me. This was like worst feeling ever. But I would have felt way worse if somebody would have come up to me after it would have been published, and now we could fix it before it was published. Of course, you always do your best to make sure that it's correct before it goes out to the reviewers, but still, people make mistakes. This happens. So then there's the question, so like, when should you share the data? And obviously here we had shared before we send it out to reviewers. And that's what we usually do, but I don't quite know when you should share the data. We usually share it when submitting our manuscripts. But that time we usually use a temporary link like Dropbox or whatever, so that mistakes can still be corrected. And then later we put in like a more like long-term link. So one of the things is you can see that this preprint, which is the first version, we also have a link there, and so this is what we usually do. Like we put it, we post a preprint of a paper, and then we also post the data set there, so that also people that read the preprint can have a look at the data if they want, and can give us suggestions. So where do you want to share the data? This is complex. Like I said in this first, one of the first slides, and it's not because it's hard to share, but the choices are too much. Yesterday there was a meeting at our university where they introduced us to another platform where we could share the data, and there's simply too much for me. Like there are several international things where we can share, and then there's like much more. So for me, what's important, I don't like to pay for it, and I think it's not needed to pay for it. I think it's important that it has a DOI, so a digital object identifier. Because if it has a DOI, then it's findable and citable, so people can also cite your data set, at least so you get some credit for it, which is, well, how it can benefit your scientific career. This is one of the things, apart from, like, if you do all these things, you'll probably be viewed as a more rigorous researcher. And I will also go always for something that is likely to be still alive after 15 years. So I try to look for partners which have long-term funding and which are likely to be not websites that are gone after 5 years. So that's why I very much a fan of the OSF and of Zenodo, because they have long-term funding and they're probably going to be around for, like, Zenodo has funding for the next 15 years, OSF something like that as well. So DANS is from the Dutch universities, I think. I don't know what their funding is, so I haven't been putting too much data there. Figshare is quite good, and GitHub is most likely going to be around for code for quite some while as well. So I cannot tell you where you should share it. It also depends. So GitHub is really for code. Zenodo is more for data. And OSF, you can do everything there. Like I showed you, you have the pre-registrations, which you can also do at OSF. So I highly encourage you to take a look at the OSF website. So yeah, this is for me really the complex thing. Apart from the privacy issues, like which of these partners should you choose to share your data? Good. Then some takeaways. Should you pre-register, share your data and code? Well, obviously yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't be giving this talk here. And I think it costs. Interesting. I think it costs very little time. I mean, your data should be organized anyway. and can greatly benefit you and others. So it can benefit you in terms of the fact that, you ensure that others can look at your data, and you publish more trustworthy data, and you get citations from the data possibly. So it improves your profile as a researcher, but also, like, I think more importantly, the robustness of your research. I think that's, to me, it's the most important. I don't care so much about my scientific career in a way. I care more about the robustness of my work and that being good. And I think that my scientific career will follow from that, or at least I hope so. So if you want to know more about this, a good place to start is the Open Science Foundation, osf.org. Is that link correct? I have it here. Yeah, that should be correct. No, that's not correct. Sorry, the link there is wrong. It's osf.io. Yeah, and so I would have a very good movie here, which I'm just going to type in the chat on YouTube, because actually I tell all this, and I have PhD students who will help me with most of this, actually. And they do a lot of awesome work. And one of them, Moira van Leeuwen, she made an awesome movie on open science. And I would like to share that on the YouTube link, but I cannot finding it. I cannot find it on YouTube myself now. So I'm sorry, I cannot share that movie. But there is an amazing movie by one of my PhD students, which should be in here. Well, that's all I had to say, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor, for such an interesting presentation. I believe we have learned a lot from the sharing session. Okay, let us move now to the Q&A session. I think Doctor already answered the question from the participant. Okay, and now we go for the next question. Okay, this one we get from the registration form. Okay, from question number 1 from Mr. Akmal. How can scientific data contribute to people making good decisions in everyday life? Number 2, every university in developed countries has a large research fund. How can such a university like in the Netherlands cooperate with a university in a developing country like the University Science Malaysia?
Okay. So to do the first question, how can scientific data contribute to people making good decisions in everyday life? That is a very complicated question. It's very broad, very general. And I think it has to do more with policy making than with science per se. And I think that there should be a good communication between policymakers and lawmakers and scientists. And I am more so. Yeah, I'm not really in that position in a way. So what I do, and because my research is more fundamental, so I try to see how people walk and what we can learn from that. And what I do is I try to collaborate a lot with physicians who have questions about how their patients walk and why they are unstable. So I try to collaborate with them and bring in my knowledge there. But this is a complex question, which I think doesn't have one answer. So I'm gonna pass a bit on that one. So then the other one, the university has a large research fund. Well, yes, it's large, but it's also it's been too low. But that's no. So I think this is one of the things where open science. This is also one of the reasons actually why I do open science, because I find it very unfair that we have a large fund and we have like a lot of possibilities, and so if I can develop code that somebody else can use, I'm very happy. Like I'm very happy, right? If other people can use that, because it basically I have more resources to develop it than some other people in the world, and so I'm very privileged in a way, and I'd like to share that with others. So that's why I'm sharing my data and code. I can do experiments, right? And that's why, and others don't have that lab. Well, they can have my data, they can have my code. And like as in terms of collaborations, I think that most people, like if you have good ideas, are open for collaborations. It's just that often, so for some projects, there is actually money to do research with developed countries or developing countries. But for some there is not, but still people would be very open to at least I am, and I think this is the general mindset of people that are like doing open science kind of stuff, that if you have a good idea and we can do it without any funds, I'm still very willing to work on it, right? And there's things that you can do without funds, because if you bring in expertise from both sides, and maybe we can have a student do the project here and somebody does the analysis there. There's all these kind of possibilities. So I think you should be thinking in terms of possibilities. And I also think that for me as a researcher in a developed country, and I also urge my colleagues to do that, to be very much aware of how privileged we are and to share that privilege as much as possible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Okay, next we go to the second question from Dr. Wan Mariam, Wan Ahmad Kamil. Can I share my research papers that are not published in gold access or open access?
So I don't know about the law in Malaysia. I know the Dutch law states that your own papers, they should always be, they are basically after 6 months, you should be able to share them. So for us, and this is the Dutch law. So our university library basically tracks our papers via, I don't know, Scopus or whatever. And after 6 months, they will put it on their website. Always. So, but this is Dutch law. So this is one of the things, but the publishers cannot do anything about that. But if you, not for your current papers, but for your next papers, if you put up a preprint before you send it to the journal, most journals allow preprints. Preprints are always free to find, so your paper is open access. Yeah, so everybody everywhere in the world can find it, even though you published in a closed access journal. And this to me is really important, again, because like you said, in developing countries, people don't have, like we have access to, I don't know how many journals. I never go to the journal website because I hate it. I think they ask way too much money for publishing and for reading. So I try to find a preprint. I always go for the preprint. So if you preprint, that's always allowed. You can also always, for every journal, put on the Word file or a PDF file that you created yourself. The last submission on your own website is allowed. Nobody can do anything about that. What's also allowed is to share your papers via ResearchGate. So you cannot openly share them, but if people ask them, you can just send it to them. And I highly recommend all of these things. So preprints to me are like, it's very important to do that, because indeed you're opening up your research. Yeah.
Okay. So we go for the next from Miss Hanin Nabil. Any opportunities for postgraduate students and passionate people to work with Prof Sod on a research experiment?
So currently we don't have any open positions. I always have to say, like, if a master student or a PhD student wants to come and work and they bring in their own funding, they're more than welcome. But I don't have money to support people. We will have an open postdoc position, which is very specific. So we are searching for somebody who has experience with EEG and preferably also Parkinson's patients and EEG during walking. So that's, yeah, we will have an open position, and all our positions are posted on the website of the university, and will most often also be tweeted via our university account.
Okay. So next question is from Miss Ramla. Can we share research data before publication? Do we need to embargo our research data before it is published for others to see and use?
Well, that depends on two things, I think. Well, three things maybe. It depends on whether it's privacy sensitive data and what the privacy laws in your country state. So for instance, the Dutch laws are quite strict on this, but if we have consent, then it's possible. It depends on the university policy, and it depends on what you want yourself. So for me personally, I don't care. I can share all my data as soon as I have collected it. And some people say, well, if you do that, then maybe others will do your project. And to me, I would respond, well, if others can do the same project as me just as quick as I will do it, and then they're probably better than me, so they should be doing the project, and I shouldn't be doing it, right? So I have no problem with sharing the data at whatever moment. I don't put embargoes on data. And like, the only problem for me is the privacy laws, which prevents me from sharing all of my data. And yeah, so this is to me the biggest problem. I don't see any problems because, well, if somebody's going to do something with your data and they can do it better than you, well, that's only better for science, no?
Okay.
So then, like, if they can do it better than me, then maybe they should be doing it and not me. Yeah, so that means that I'm doing the wrong thing after all anyway.
Okay. Okay. So this is the last question, Doctor, from Mr. Musa. Some researchers are very skeptical to share data. How to convince them to share their research data?
Yeah, so I would ask the opposite question: why not share the data? Right? It's there. Yeah, to me, I don't see any good reasons not to share the data. So if you're afraid that you're getting scooped, that people are going to do the same thing as you, then maybe you're not working on the right research question, right? Because then you're going to get scooped anyway at some point. Yeah, so then you should find, like, because then there's people that are better than you and working what you're working on. And then, yeah, maybe you're not working on the right thing then. You know, that's just my opinion. So I don't see reasons not to share the data other than the privacy data.
Okay. So that's all for the Q&A session. Okay, so now we have come to the end of the webinar. Okay, once again, on behalf of the organizing committee at the USM Library, we would like to express our sincere thanks to the audience, especially to our speaker for spending your valuable time with all of us this evening. We would also like to apologize for any inconvenience during this session. Okay, before we end, don't forget to fill out our e-feedback form to get an e-certificate and CPD points for USM staff. Okay, so for USM staff, you must scan using the Passport USM. Okay, you may download the apps and also update the Passport USM. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page to get the latest updates and upcoming events. Okay. So with that note, thank you once again. Thank you, Dr. Soj. Okay.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. See you next time. Take care, everyone. Assalamualaikum and bye.
Bye-bye.